So let's go over the top 5 reasons why you shouldn't buy Diablo 4. Now, I know what a lot of you are immediately thinking, wow, another hater about Diablo 4. It's actually not true. I personally give the game an 8 out of 10 from the beta experience. I think it's an absolutely amazing game. However, there are a lot of negative critiques about the game, wishing that it was something that it was not. Things like, for example, people not wanting the sort of backtracking or repetitive content, or potentially other things on this list, which we're going to go over. So if you're one of those people that, are talking about Diablo 4 and hoping that it is some sort of game, and hoping that they'll change some things to make it potentially something that you want to play, I would suggest you might skip out on it and instead focus your endeavors on something else. Let's get into it. So the first thing, and honestly the most important thing arguably in this game, is that it will be repetitive. If you've never played an ARPG, they are all repetitive. I think that that is something that a lot of people can kind of basically accept as fact, right? Every single ARPG has a very similar pattern and very, very repetitive content. Diablo 2, whether or not you want to admit it, it does end up running similar runs over and over for better loot. Diablo 3, it is literally the same Greater Rift simulator for the entire game, with the exception of potentially running bounties over and over again. If you play, Path of Exile, you're gonna be mapping. If you play Last Epoch even, it is literally the same content over and over and over again, with potentially different maps, but the same logic applies. This isn't actually necessarily a bad thing. However, if you're expecting it to be massively different than just the same content where you're killing monsters in the same similar patterns over and over again with a similar build, which potentially you might be able to change up the classes, but oftentimes there are meta builds, then you probably aren't going to be interested in playing Diablo 4 or buying it, guys. It is literally the same thing over and over again. On that note as well, if you expect the dungeon system to change where they don't have as much potential backtracking, or if that's a deal breaker for you, it's probably not going to be the game that you're going to want to play, because it's very unlikely that they'll make that change for launch. So probably not going to want to invest time into this game. This next one is extremely polarizing, similar to a lot of things on there, although I admit repetitive content is not my personal favorite, but it's something that I live with because I enjoy the other mechanics of the game. However, this next one I personally really enjoy, and I'm so happy about Diablo 4 having this, and that is the open world. However, it is forced. Now, you can potentially remove the potential for console players playing with PC players or Switch players, things like that. However, you cannot prevent people from joining your instance because it is forced open world if you're going to do world bosses or events. Now, in the future, they don't have this yet, they might do like 12 people groups. You can group together for world boss, you can have a full group. But for those of you that are solo players, you will not be able to play solo in the open world. You'll have someone potentially screw up your event, make it more difficult for you, or just be in the area killing faster than you will. This is a huge deal breaker for a lot of people, and if you're someone that is enjoying the game or does tend to enjoy games as a solo player, running through and doing your own thing, this is probably a deal breaker for you, so you're probably going to want to skip out on Diablo 4. This next one might be a little bit strange to mention, but it is an absolute deal breaker for a lot of people, and that is that click to move is force. Now, there is a force move, and when I say click to move, I mean pressing a key or your mouse to move. Now, there is a force move, as I mentioned, so you can potentially move without hitting someone, but a lot of people without the WASD movement, you don't even want to play. However, there is controller support, so you can use a numpad or potentially a thumbstick, but oftentimes people just won't play a game if they don't have WASD movement. And unfortunately, Blizzard usually draws a hard line with this, and I don't see them ever potentially adding it for Diablo 4. So again, if you don't want to click to move or use, a controller or use the force move, then this is probably not something that you're going to want to tangle with. This next one goes out to a lot of the MMORPG players out there, like myself, and that is that the game is meant to be reset to some degree. What I mean by this is if you've played Diablo 3 or even Diablo 2, oftentimes the most hype moments are season starters. So you're going to go compete against leaderboards and rush to be the first people, or not even necessarily rush, but just casually grind your way through a new season with new mechanics and a fresh character. Now, there's not necessarily a must do this. You can play a character and not get reset. That is possible in Diablo 3, and I am absolutely certain it's going to be in Diablo 4. However, the game doesn't necessarily lend itself to a massive longevity, right? There's going to be a point where you have every legendary item, where you've beaten all the content, and you've done everything in the game. Now, you can repeat yourself to get the same loot and not even improve your character. It's not necessarily like MMOs where you have this long grind ahead of you for account-wide bonuses or cosmetics or things like that, because the cosmetics are actually in the shop. So really, a lot of people play around the seasons where you're going to be resetting your character again, grinding up that leaderboard. So if this is not something that you technically enjoy doing, then maybe, I don't know, play a season and then that's it, or maybe potentially don't even necessarily play at all. This last one will be a huge bummer for a lot of people in the leveling process or even into the later game if you want to push higher difficulties, and that is that legendary items will determine your build. Now, this isn't necessarily super different compared to, especially like Diablo 3, right? In Diablo 3, you're going to get a set item, and that is your build, right? You're going to want to run those skills with the specific amplifications. For example, your God Demon Hunter set where you run your Hungering Arrow Strave, or potentially some minor modifications, but generally the same build. And this is going to be similar in Diablo 4. Now, especially for the leveling process, the legendary items and aspects that you acquire are going to determine what build you're typically going to want to run if you want to push those higher difficulties. Same thing applies to the later endgame. You're going to want to really heavily push specific builds, typically your more meta builds or your few 3 to 4 legendary item based builds that will push you into those nightmare dungeons and scale really hard. Oftentimes in these games, you can't just do whatever you want and participate in a lot of these endgame content, unlike, again, MMOs, where, yeah, you can run a build, and yes, it will be helpful, especially if you want to push the endgame content, but doing the entire dungeon system or even your open world can generally be accomplished with whatever you want in these other games, whereas in Diablo, I think, generally speaking, the game can get a little bit more difficult, and unless, you are potentially really adamant about playing a build and you want to like super try hard, you're probably going to want to let the legendary items determine your build, and that is a huge bummer for a lot of people. So those are my top 5 reasons why you shouldn't buy Diablo 4. Now, again, I want to mention, for those of you that got to this part of the video, I personally am going to absolutely dive into Diablo 4 with a ton of hours. I really enjoyed the game, probably more so than most people out there as content creators. However, I also know that there's some realities with the game, and if you fall into one of these categories, then it's probably not a game for you. And it's better left to just probably move on rather than sit in the community and potentially, want the game to change into something that it won't be. So I decided to make this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys did like the video, sub to the channel, and I will see you all for a video tomorrow.